Welcome everyone to Lecture 3 of EDSS379. So this week we are looking at historical content, skills, and resources. Last week we looked at the inquiry model, which was a big week. There were a lot of readings and a lot of things to understand about it, the inquiry model, which is used quite a bit in the HASS subjects. This week we're looking at the content, skills, and resources, which is equally important for you to understand. We need to know what to teach. We need to know the skills that students need to develop when they are studying history. And we need to know about sources and what types of sources are important when teaching history. So the two chapters that you need to read for today, for this week, are listed on the PowerPoint there. Two chapters from the textbook, Learning History and Teaching Historical Inquiry. You'll find that some parts of these chapters focus on secondary teaching of history, but I encourage you to have a read through those. As I've said many times before, it's important to see where students go after they leave primary school. I've said the same thing to secondary teachers, that it's important to look back on the K-6. It is actually a very good practice to see what sort of skills and content students are looking at prior to coming to high school. Students will be at different levels, and of course we consider differentiation in terms of how students learn, but we need to understand the content and the skills that students are understanding and developing before they come to high school. I think that's really important. So in addition to the two chapters from the textbook, the topic notes guide you a little bit more through some of these ideas of content, skills, and resources. But there's also a section on why history matters, which we've talked about before. We need to know why it matters so much to teach it, so that when we are teaching, we can impart that onto students. There's also an overview of the organization of the New South Wales syllabus and the Australian curriculum for HASS subjects. There is some overview of concepts and, of course, the skills and information sources, which I will talk a little bit about today. There is a quiz that is available to you to complete on Moodle. It is not accessible, however, you can see it as more of a self-assessment to see if you are understanding some of the ideas that are presented to you in the readings for this week. So the first chapter that you are looking at this week is called Learning History from the textbook. And the focus of this chapter, written by Brett, is, and he succinctly says it with the following question, which he states on page 244. How can historical learning enable young people to investigate the opportunities and problems of the past and the modern world, to decide what might need challenging or cherishing, and to participate in the making of a better future for themselves, their communities, and their world? I think that's a really good question, because we're not just sitting here thinking, okay, so what do I need to teach them? But how can historical learning actually enable them to investigate all these problems of the past and so forth, and the impacts on the modern world today? That's what we're looking at here. It's a how question. It's a difficult question because we're talking about processes now. So we need to actually help students to learn and think historically, and that is the aim across the study of history in K-10. We really want them to think that. But what does that mean? It sounds really great, but what does it mean to think historically? The best definition of what it means to think historically is provided by Taylor, who states that thinking historically has 6 main categories, and I've listed them there on the PowerPoint. Let's just quickly go through them. What does it mean to think historically? Well, that you have an understanding of the use and reliability of different forms of evidence. Very important today. We are in an information age where we are bombarded with information in so many different places, in particular on the internet. So having students understand, key word, the reliability of different forms of evidence is a great start for them, because it's a very important skill to be able to have those questions about what's reliable and what isn't. And that will help them in other subjects as well, for sure. A capacity to establish causal links between events. So making connections between different events is very important, either through different themes that you're looking at, and that can help them to see relevance across different topics as well. An understanding of change over time, very important, and you'll see the concept of continuity and change come up time and time again, and in particular as they proceed into high school and in the senior years, the senior subjects for HASS focus on continuity and change. So this is something that stays with them in their studies as they continue on right up to the senior years. An ability to see events from the point of view of participants, empathy. Again, this word you will see come up time and time again. It is a skill, empathetic understanding, but it's also a concept that they need to understand, empathy. Okay, being able to understand the point of view of others isn't always easy, even for adults. But if we can help students try to develop that skill of empathetic understanding, I think that's a really good thing for them to become a great citizen and a lifelong learner. An ability to sift through evidence and reach conclusions, historical explanations that are thoughtfully provisional. And remembering that not everything is set in stone. New evidence becomes available and theories and ideas change. So getting them to understand that what we think right now may change with new ideas that come up is important as well. And we don't always know for sure the explanations that we have are necessarily true. Okay, so that's why it says thoughtfully provisional. An ability to communicate conclusions and place events in their appropriate historical context. Two things, very important that you're providing that context when you start a topic so they know what point in time we're talking about. And it's kind of hard sometimes for students to understand what 100 years ago is, or what it means when you say a long time ago, or when you say in the past. Those ideas are sometimes hard for students. So I was speaking with somebody else about the use of the word past, present, and future, which you'll see come up time and time again. Well, we know what the past is. It's everything behind us that's happened before. And we know what the future is. It's everything that's going to happen next. But the present is really only just this little dot in time. As soon as it begins, it's finished and it becomes the past. And it's kind of weird to think of it like that because we really only have speculation about what could happen in the future, and what we really only have are our understandings of past events. That's all we have. So thinking historically is recognizing that concept as well. And the second thing I was going to say is an ability to communicate conclusions. So the use of the word communication, that's one of the skills that students need to be able to do. It's great for them to know and understand and ask questions, but they need to be able to communicate that understanding to you as the teacher, and that is a very important skill, but also a way of thinking historically, being able to communicate. Actually, before I finish this slide here, I just want to mention a quote by Taylor at the end of the chapter is stated on page 246, which I think is very interesting. Taylor states, "Good history teachers guide students towards questions and investigations rather than attempting to fill heads." And that's something that we've talked about before. We don't just stand at the front and want students to just know when and where of everything. We want them to have questions, have more questions, and investigate to try to find answers. And we've talked about that in the past 2 weeks quite a bit. So I think that's really great to remember that being a good history teacher means that you're guiding students. You're not just telling students, this is when, the Australian colonies, and a whole bunch of information there. It's guiding them towards questions. So keeping that in mind. So this is a word that I've said time and time again, relevance. How can we make history relevant for students? That's what we need to do, because if they don't see the relevance, they won't be interested, and they'll actually hate the subject, in particular as they go into high school. So we need to make them like history. We want them to like history because it's a very important subject. So how can we make history relevant to students? Heritage constructions of the past and the present linking to community involvement. And these are presented to you in the textbook, and I thought they were quite good, so I wanted to bring them up to you. So looking at the local communities and thinking about how, maybe there might be some sort of construction in town or whatever, and linking that to them so they can see the relevance in their own community. A focus on historical significance. So why are we actually learning what we're learning? You need to make sure that students know that there's a reason why we are studying this topic. Why this and not something else? What's been left out of the syllabus and why has this been included? And that significance needs to be imparted to students in some way. Exploration of issues around identity. Well, we all have identities, and it's very relevant to everybody because we all have one. So talking about issues of identity, in particular in stages 2 and 3, we're talking about Australia as a nation and so forth, and that can bring up topics of, Australian identity. Maybe some students aren't born in Australia, and they may feel connected to the identity of another country. So that can be a topic of discussion too, and that's very relevant for people. Through emotive history, considering the feelings and motives of people in the past. And again, there's that word empathy, very important, and it's constantly coming up. Being able to understand what the reasons are for what people did in the past. Potentially, we don't actually always know why people did what they did, but we can try to understand why people did what they did. And that's, as I said before, a very important thing for students because even a lot of adults can't do this, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So if we can have students build that skill, develop that skill of empathetic understanding, then I think we are going in the right direction as teachers, for sure. Teaching history effectively. How can we do this? How can we do it so that it matters, so that it means something? What can we do in the classroom? What works? Well, we can connect through those general capabilities, which is that multicolored cube that I showed you in the past couple of weeks, or perhaps you may have seen it in the textbook or on the ACARA website. Have a look if you haven't already. How can we do it? Active talking and discussion. Interactive, where students are throwing questions at each other and talking about a topic, or talking with the teacher and working it out, making it relevant. There's that word again. So connections to contemporary society related to the lives of children needs to be relevant to them, has to be. Critical, having children think for themselves. That's a very important skill, and it is one of the general capabilities. Collaborative, having students work together in groups. Not always an easy thing to do, but having them do that can help them with thinking critically and also with your teaching and making it effective history teaching. And participative, so giving choices and say in learning, which is very important. Now, not always easy because we kind of have this syllabus that's prescribed and we need to be teaching these topics. However, if I had to say, if somebody said to me, okay, you can erase the entire syllabus, the history syllabus, but you need to save just one part of it, what would you save? And I would say the outcomes, because you can kind of play around with the topics a little bit, but you can't touch the outcomes. They are set in stone. So just keep that in mind. So, but giving them a choice, so maybe perhaps by that point, what is meant is there may be a student who enjoys the topic that we're talking about, but may have a question about something sort of related. And you may spend a little bit of time investigating that topic, because even though it's not in the syllabus, it's relevant, it's relatable to the theme that you're talking about, and the students are interested, or many of them are. So I would definitely not shut that down, and I would definitely bring that in. I have done that before. So historical concepts, I'll bring this up a few times in the lecture, but I just wanted to draw your attention to them. There they are on the screen. So significance, continuity and change, cause and effect, empathy, contestability, and perspectives. Keeping in mind that contestability only arrives on the scene in stage 3. Prior to that, students are not expected to understand that concept. But contestability continues up to year 10, and they must be able to grasp that concept by that time. So keep those in mind. They do come up quite a bit. So if you haven't had a chance to have a look through the syllabus, please do so. Look at the different topics. So history is a distinctive discipline, and there has been a constant debate about what to include in the curriculum. The history curriculum has been closely tied with understandings of citizenship in dealing with social and political issues. And students need to critically analyze how governments have worked and failed over time. But it's not just what we teach in history that's been up for debate. It's also about how to teach it. And now we're looking at the inquiry learning, which works quite well and is important. So rote learning, we don't do that anymore. We don't just throw facts and figures at students. We don't want them to memorize the dates of this and the dates of that, which I had to do. And I can't remember any of them, I'm being honest. Now we're looking at the why and how questions. And if you go to your syllabus and look at those questions that are at the beginning of each of the topics, you'll find that many of them are the why and how questions. And the how questions are difficult because we are asking students to think about processes. And that can be difficult to do, but it requires inquiry learning, deeper learning, which is more beneficial for them. So as I said, if you look through the content, there is an inquiry focus for each level, those different questions, and they can be modified, but you need to ensure that they do address the outcomes. As I said, the outcomes are not, there's no negotiation on those. But the questions you can fiddle around with a little bit. So if you look at the topics from early stage 1 to stage 3, you can see how they go from the personal level to more of the wider Australian view. So there's a lot more historical content as you proceed through the stages. You need to know more as a history teacher, and you need to know more about the history of the local community and the nation as well. So as you can see here, this chart here is in the syllabus, and you can download it if you'd like to, but it shows the different topics there. So early stage 1, we've got personal and family histories. Stage 1 is the past and the present. Stage 2, we're looking at Australian history, community and remembrance, first contacts. Stage 3, where they're finishing primary school, Australian history, colonial and national. Once they go to high school in years 7 and 8, they look at world history, ancient, medieval, and modern. And years 9 and 10, they look to more the global history, the modern world, and Australia. So you see that progression there. And those historical concepts and skills which we're talking about today are embedded in all the topics from early stage 1 right to stage 5, and they continue, except for contestability. That comes in stage 3. So if you are an early stage 1 teacher, understand that those skills and concepts that you are developing are ones that they will be using in their historical thinking all the way up to year 10. It doesn't stop. So I'm just going to take us out of here for a moment, and I'm just going to show you where you can find the content in case you aren't sure. So this is stage 2. So you'll notice, and I've probably mentioned this before, the first page kind of tells you a little bit about the topics that you'll be looking at in this teaching, an overview of the teaching and learning. There are the concepts that are taught throughout stage 3. They list them there. And those are the skills that students will address throughout stage 2. So it breaks it down for you for all of stage 2. Remembering that stage 2 is 2 different year levels. So when you're looking for the content, this is the first topic for stage 2. We've got the outcomes at the top, the key inquiry questions, and then down here is the content. So this part here at the top is the main part of the content, and underneath that is what students will be able to do in relation to that content. Okay, so the importance of country and place to Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples and so forth. Students will identify the original Aboriginal languages spoken in the area, local or regional area. So the dot points are building on this point here. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you there. I'll probably come back to the syllabus because I may be showing you something else as we go through. So, historical knowledge and understanding. Very important as a history teacher that you are teaching historical knowledge. So students learn about Australian history and its world history context by investigating societies, events, movements, and developments that have shaped history. And the historical understanding is where they apply their understanding of the different skills. Okay, so, the different concepts there that are bolded. And there it states that the concept of contestability is added in stage 3. So applying concepts lies at the heart of historical knowledge and understanding. And concepts are revisited throughout their study of history, which I showed you in the previous slide. Concepts are very much linked together. So if you're looking at perspectives, if students are looking at different perspectives, they may also be engaging in empathetic understanding as well, because they're being asked to put themselves in different shoes, right? So can you see some other links there that would go together? So these must be covered across the 7 years of schooling, and some concepts you may find are found more than others. Have a look back at the toy example. What concepts did we address in that study? We looked at continuity and change. We looked at cause and effect. So we asked think about why the toys were different, what sort of technology impacted on the change of toys. Significance wasn't really relevant. We looked at different perspectives, so maybe the toys that are used today and the toys that are used by older citizens. And empathy, maybe trying to understand why other people had the toys that they did. And again, contestability wasn't looked at because it's not stage 3. So you need to know the potential of addressing different concepts and different topics and how they emerge. And some of these concepts may be new to some of you, and that's okay. We're learning as we go. That's what we do as teachers as well. So there's an emphasis on historical evidence, which is different from other HASS subjects. Each source that you look at needs to be interrogated, where students are questioning sources and questions that lead to more questions. So we'll talk a little bit more about sources in a moment. But your knowledge is very important too. So you're teaching historical knowledge, but you need to have a knowledge base as well. So have a look through the syllabus and have a think about where you may need to learn some more about what certain parts of history, in particular in stages 2 and 3. So for myself, first coming from Canada, I didn't know a lot about Australian history. I've told this story to you guys, I believe, before, and that was something that I had to relearn a few times because I didn't know everything there was to know about Australian history. Still learning about it, even today. So key ideas that are developed by studying history in the primary classroom. So these are the ideas here. I'll just read them out. So that a world existed before students and those around them were born. Some things occurring many years ago. The past can be described in different ways, so different dates, period labels, decade, century, and so forth. The past was different to today. Some things have changed, but some things have remained the same. People in the past often did things differently for a reason and often for different reasons. It is not always easy to work out why things happened and why people did things. People in the past did not know the same as we do. We can put together a story about the past in different ways, and this story can be different if we use different information or have views about what is important. People in the past did not always think the same things were as important in their lives as we do today. We find out about the past from different sources, written accounts, artifacts, and pictures. Some topics have lots of surviving information, and some not very much. Not all the information can be trusted. We always need to be careful when using any evidence from the past. With their care, though, we can make some use of all information. It is often better when we can find more than one piece of information. The more we find, the more we are likely to be closer towards what probably happened. And there is a difference between a source and evidence. The source is the information, but it is the historian who uses it as evidence in building an answer to the historical question under investigation. Okay, so those are key ideas. You can have a read through those again if you'd like to, but that's what we want to generate in the classroom with students. So if students are going to engage in historical inquiry effectively, then we actually need them to develop historical skills. So what are skills? Well, they are the ways in which we actually complete a task. So the more inquiry that you have in your teaching, that means that there will be more skills, okay? And these lessons that you have can fail very fast if students don't have the skills, and this has happened to me. And that was a lesson learned for me. For example, students were doing a research project in year 7, and it failed because, or the first part of it failed because I didn't realize how much students didn't know about how to actually find information on the internet. And when we were in the library at the computers, it quickly failed because I realized that we need to take a step back and talk about and learn about how to actually do research. It wasn't just, okay guys, this is what we're doing here, you need to go and research it. It's not that easy. No, we had to take a step back. So that was a lesson that failed for me. So that was a really good learning point for me, actually. So I can speak from the heart there on how lessons fail if students do not have the skills. So the relationship between skills and inquiry is quite large. What is the purpose of skills? Students can be successful with the task if they know how to do the skills. Using skills provides variety in lessons. So my lessons was when I was a student, just writing down what the teacher wrote on the board. That was it. Very boring and not much variety at all. Students gain confidence when they can do new things in the different lessons that you're doing. And this is transferable to other subjects. So some of the skills that they're learning with you, they'll be able to do in other classes as well. I remember when teaching geography, at one point I was teaching, I can't remember exactly what we were doing. I can't remember the topic, sorry, but it ended up being where it turned into a bit of a math lesson because we had to learn a little bit about how to cross multiply and so forth. I did get some comments. This isn't math. Well, it is connected. So I had to explain that too. But what they're learning in your class in skills, they can do across other subjects as well, and will help them as they proceed through their learning. Lifelong learners. So having these different types of skills will help them in the future. So what are the different types of skills? Well, we have cognitive skills, which are where students are thinking and comprehending of different concepts and terms. We have research skills, which is like the one example that I just told you where my lesson failed because my students, many of them, probably about 80%, didn't know how to even research. Finding relevant information and posing questions, that was where my lesson failed that time. So social skills, being able to work in a group, not always easy, often very difficult. Teacher needs to be very active in helping students manage the group work and the interaction there. That is a skill. We know that not all people work well together, and it is something that needs to be developed. Communication skills, so reading, writing, listening, speaking, explanation, these are all things that students need to be able to do. Sometimes they'll be standing in front of the class, speaking about a topic, or they will be writing down some information that they will be communicating to you in a poem or in a little story or something like that. Affective skills, so the idea of values education, which we will be talking about in a couple of weeks, and also analysis and empathy as well, which we've talked about in this lecture as well. Manipulative, so think about dexterity, being able to cut with scissors and so forth. Some students struggle with that in the early years and can't get their hands around actually using scissors, so that's a skill as well. Discipline skills specific to history and geography. So when you go to geography, you'll be looking at mapping skills. There will be different skills that you need to know there. And right now we're talking about historical skills in this lecture. So if you think about the cross-curriculum priorities and the general capabilities, you can think about some more skills. So ICT is there, and critical and creative thinking. So there's a lot of different types of skills that students need to be developing. Don't feel overwhelmed, though. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. It will come together. It's not as daunting as you think. So the teachers can demonstrate a skill expected of students. So this is how skills can be taught effectively. So this teacher can demonstrate it and show the students. There's a think out loud strategy where you're, say, finding information in a book and the teacher models the steps to find the information, for example, using the table of contents, or what is an index, alphabetical order of different words and so forth, and seeing and listening, watching the teacher perform the different steps. The teacher can say, okay, now I'm going to do this. Now if I'm looking for this word, if I'm looking for the word colony in this book, what do you think I might do? Maybe they might not know. And then you demonstrate it to them. Students need clear modeling, and this is the case for all year levels, right up to year 12, I would say. And if this skill isn't developed, the lesson will fail. So modeling is one that I used all the time. When students had to write a paragraph, I would write a paragraph myself and show them the process of moving from one sentence to another. Giving effective comment, even if it's positive. So feedback is really important. Telling a student, okay, great, you got it. That doesn't tell them anything because there are many things that could be great about it. It could be the idea, it could be the way the sentence is written. You need to be specific about what it is that they've done so well, because then that will tell them next time when they do it, oh yeah, my teacher gave me a compliment that I spell really well. So I want to make sure that that's what I continue to do. So the positive feedback is just as important as the constructive criticism. Right, we'll go to the next slide now. So why do we need skills in history? It's very integral to the discipline, and it's definitely having skills is required to engage in the inquiry method, which is very important in HASS subjects. Skills enable students to engage with history, to explore, discover, inquire, and experience history, and that's what we want. So we highlight the cognitive skills in the outcomes. I will do that for you as we go through probably the syllabus maybe later this week or early next week, and I will show you those cognitive skills that are really important to recognize. You can have a look through the syllabus and highlight those cognitive skills and see what do they mean? What does it mean to identify? What does that actually mean? We'll talk a little bit more about that. So the historical skills, what are they? These are the ones here that you need to be looking at. So comprehension, so chronology, terms, concepts, analysis and use of sources, perspectives and interpretations, empathetic understanding, research, explanation, and communication. So I'm just going to take us out of here for a moment, and I do have to scroll through the syllabus to find what I want. So I apologize for the fast movement of the page. If you can download the syllabus for yourself, the K to 10, go to this page here, which is page 20, and this shows you the history skills continuum. And you can see across the top here that these are the different skills, and this shows the development of them over time. So analysis and use of sources. In early stage 1, students are exploring and using a range of sources about the past, identifying and comparing features of objects from the past and the present. If we go all the way down to stage 5, we can see that they are identifying still different types of sources, identifying the origin, content, context, and purpose of primary and secondary sources, process and synthesize information from a range of sources as evidence in a historical argument, evaluate the reliability and usefulness of primary and secondary sources for a specific historical inquiry. So you see from early stage 1 to stage 5 the development. And if you just read through them all and start from the top and see how they build. So explore, looking at perspectives and interpretations. Explore a point of view. Next, explore a point of view within a historical context. Next, identify different points of view within a historical context. Stage 5, identify and analyze the reasons for different perspectives in a particular historical context. Recognize that historians may interpret events and developments differently. So what I just really want to emphasize here is that students are starting here and they're building all of these different skills right up to year 10. And they may continue history into the senior years, but they are definitely working up to stage 5 in New South Wales. Some other states don't go up to year 10. They may only go to year 9. But regardless, when high school teachers start here, this is what is expected of students. Okay, not always achievable by all students, and all students are at different levels. But look through that connection. I encourage you to look through from beginning to end for each of these different skills. I think that would be a really good thing to do. Okay. So going back to the PowerPoint. So we'll talk a little bit more about these as we go through. So these skills must be integrated into the teaching and the concepts that we talked about before. So significance, continuity and change, and so forth. They provide the context through which these skills can be developed. So keeping that in mind too. So skill development, let's think about the question, how has new technology changed family life? So this could be an extension of the toys, and we're talking about family life. So we can look at the skill of comprehension. We can look at new ways of looking at time and dates, so periods of time. So I mentioned before about long ago and in the past. What does that mean? What types of words do we use to describe time, yesterday, last week, and so forth? A generation, the term modernization, antique, young, old. So you can introduce these types of words. Analysis and use of sources. So what sort of sources will we use in this type of investigation? How will we be able to answer how technology has changed family life? What source are we going to use to answer that? Perspectives and interpretations. So we may look at oral histories. We may have maybe different people come in and talk about how they feel technology has changed family life. You can ask a question with the guest speaker. And students can learn different accounts, that there are different historical accounts and that there are different perspectives. and for different reasons. So some people may have more of a positive outlook on how technology has changed family life, and others may have a less positive outlook. Students can then learn that there are different historical accounts and different perspectives for different reasons. Interpretation requires that students are empathetic, and as they begin to understand different beliefs and values, traditions, and practices of a different time, they can infer what people may have thought long ago. So in order to think about how technology has changed family life, we need to think about how family life was in the past, and maybe it's a little bit different now. We may not be able to know exactly what happened in the past, but we can certainly understand different possibilities. We can look at these different concepts. So these will be emphasized in this sort of question where we're looking at continuity and change. So maybe we might be looking at appliances and how they've changed in the household. I remember my grandfather used to have a radio like that, and I never see those anymore. You can think about the use of the microwave. That's another appliance. So cause and effect, how events have developed and what has caused those changes to occur. So how come all of a sudden now everybody has a microwave? You know, how many years ago people didn't have a microwave? So what has caused that change to occur? If we're thinking about, how busy everybody is and how handy microwaves are, we can think about family life in that way. And perspective, so we're looking at oral histories about the past and why older citizens perhaps would rather wash all their dishes than put it in a dishwasher. I know of some older citizens who are like that as well, because that's just the way they've always done it. And they don't have a dishwasher and never use it, which is fair enough. Okay, next slide. So, students, if we think about explanation and communication, so students actually need to be able to communicate what they have learned in your lessons and your sequences. And they need to convey their findings that demonstrate their historical knowledge, skills, and understanding. And they can communicate in different ways in assessment. So this is an example of one talking about changes then and now. So in the past and right now, how things are right now. Just an example there of what you could do in this situation. So you can have a look through that if you'd like to, a little bit more closely in the slides. So looking at sources. Sources need to be developed over understanding of sources, and analysis of sources needs to be developed from one stage to the next. And similar to what I just showed you in that chart, you can have a look there to see how that's developed. So the skill of identifying the differences between primary and secondary sources is definitely there. Sources need to be interpreted, and there can be different interpretations of sources. What is relevant to a certain topic may not be relevant. So a particular source may not be, or the type of source you use may not be used across different topics. And not all sources provide evidence. Some may not even be relevant. And there may be information that's missing, or there may be information that's missing that causes students to have more questions. And because information sources are changing so fast, we need to keep that in mind as well. So we've got two different types of sources. We've got the primary sources, which are first-hand accounts of an event, and secondary sources, which offer analysis or interpretation of those primary sources. So primary sources could be like a photo, a diary, an artifact. There's no interpretation. It's just the source right there. But we have to remember that the information in these types of sources may be incorrect as well. And how we interpret them could be incorrect. It may not be actually how it was. But the secondary are the analysis of after the event or based on the primary sources. So how can we actually really rely on sources if they're just all based on interpretation? Is it relevant? And there's this idea that secondary sources are inferior to primary sources. What do you think about that idea? Do you think that's true? There are a lot of policies around what types of information sources you can use. So sometimes when you're showing a video in class, you may have to get permission from parents. And where can you get some information sources? Well, other teachers are really great at helping give use of sources. Some teachers have everything and they're very helpful. But a lot of sources can come from the community, state education websites, the libraries are really great, newspapers, the internet, which I used when I was showing you the toy one, and museums. But as a teacher, you need to evaluate the sources prior to using them, of course, in the classroom, and you need to make sure that students are actually able to get what they need from the sources that you provide to them. Okay, so when you're evaluating an information source, these are the sorts of questions that you need to think about. So does the information source actually address the outcome, content, description, and subject matter being covered in the sequence? The answer needs to be yes. What information is contained? Is it accurate, prejudice, free from propaganda, and is it up to date? Does the information source provide for a range of perspectives to be included if the inquiry question warrants? How long will it take to issue and collect? How will the students gain access to the information? What length of time will the information source need to be used for? Are there special skills and demands required of the students when using this information source? And is the information at the student's level, or will modification be needed? How will students make a factual record of information gained from this source? So keep those questions in mind when you're looking at an information source and asking yourself, will this do the job? And keep this slide in mind when we go to the next assignment, where you will be creating an inquiry sequence. More to come on this later, but you will have to come up with information sources where students will be able to gather information from. So you can ask yourself these questions for sure when you get to that assignment and in your teaching as well. So what is a source and what is its purpose? Well, a source is either going to be primary or secondary, and since we're teaching students how to be historians, they need to be able to locate evidence and be able to interpret that evidence, and we need to be teaching them how to do that as well. Historical sources need to provide insight into a certain time, event, or person. And there are many different types of sources that you can use, but you need to have a variety to keep it interesting and engaging. There's a difference between sources and evidence. So history is based on both of these. So a source is anything that can be used to investigate the past, and evidence is relevant information obtained from the sources that can be used in the inquiry sequence. So we cannot implement the history curriculum without having sources. We need to have them. And they give students opportunities to answer the questions, and it helps them develop skills. And there's so much information out there nowadays. We need students to be information literate, and we need to have critical thinking. That is part of the general capabilities. So what type of sources did you have when you were in school? And what have you noticed now in the classroom if you've been out there? What sort of sources are used? What makes a good source? Access to information. You need to be able to actually get the information. It also needs to be age and stage appropriate. So sometimes I admittedly have made a mistake of having sources that were a bit too difficult, and that was a lesson learned there for myself. Engaging, and as I said, lots of variation in the types of sources that are used. I've showed you before. I'll just click out of here for a moment. Analysis and use of sources. I kind of went through that one, I think. So, yeah, I did go through that one. Just having a look at that skill and how that builds. I won't go through it again because I've already gone through that one. So if we were to ask the question, what was life like for the Anzacs, and we had this particular photo, you could have students sort of write down some, or you could do this as a class and say, what sort of things do you notice in this photo? And you could make some annotations there. So There's a cross, there's a man sitting on a box, and all these different things that students will notice. And perhaps you can say, what might this mean? What are these different things in the photo telling us? And they can suggest possibilities. Okay, this could be sort of like an activate idea for in the activate stage of the inquiry sequence. So as this is a source here that's shown to you on the slide, consider when information sources are used in the inquiry model. I encourage you to pause the video now and write down, if you can remember, the different stages. Which stages do you think use information sources? Okay, so you've done that. What do you think? What stages? Well, we definitely use an information source in the activate stage because we need to capture the interest of students. We also use an information source in the check it out stage because students need to be gathering information. They need to be able to access the facts so that they can answer the inquiry question. And if you use the venture further part of the model, which is encouraged, you are making links with other contexts and relevance. So you will be introducing another information source to help students do that. So if you remember from the toy example, we looked at gender bias, and you could bring in flyers to have students cut out, which toys are for girls, which toys are for boys, and so forth, or Aboriginal toys or toys from another culture. So that would be a new information source that you're bringing in there. So one thing that I like that is brought up in the textbook is this topic of, are we actually assessing students on historical knowledge or historical skills? Like, what are we supposed to be assessing? And the answer is both. You do want students to know the content, and that does need to be assessed. But as we are developing skills, we need to be assessing on that as well. And the quote here is from the textbook shown on the PowerPoint. History assessments should focus on history's distinctive disciplinary concepts and modes of inquiry. So that is saying to us that we need to be looking at both of these and assessing students on these. So I hope from this lecture you can see the importance of content, knowing what to teach, skills, that it's important that we are developing those skills, and also the sourcing of information, because students are doing this, all of these, right up until year 10. Skills, concepts are continuous. It's a continuum. So please go back and look through the syllabus and look at those two different charts. And there's one for concepts as well. I showed you the one for skills. There's also one for concepts. And I keep going back to it, and because it's probably one of the most important parts of the syllabus, after the outcomes, of course. But looking at those two charts, because I think they need to guide your teaching. So that's it from me for today. I hope that you've had a good overview of content, skills, and resources, and we will continue the discussion on the discussion board. I will post up some questions for this week, and we can talk more about these. You can ask me questions, and perhaps even interact with others on the discussion board as well would be great. Thanks, everyone.